Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you break free from chronic inflammation and get your life back. I'm Dr. Rachel Yeager, naturopathic doctor and medical intuitive, and the founder of the Surviving to Thriving method of chronic illness recovery. Join me as we uncover strategies for overcoming health challenges and restoring your physical, mental, emotional, and soul health. Together, let's embark on a journey to thriving. Today, we're going to talk about perimenopause and why so many women who are going through perimenopause or any other kind of hormone transition actually get more inflammatory symptoms. So, what is it about the change in hormones that actually increases our inflammation? And we get body pain, we might get weight loss resistance that's actually associated with inflammation. We get brain fog. There can be so many other things that happen that are actually associated with inflammation and with other shifts in our other hormones, such as cortisol. So, we'll talk through why this happens, what testing you can do, and what you can do about it from a holistic perspective to help keep things balanced, to help reduce your symptoms, and to work on the root causes of things. So, let's dive into perimenopause. So, perimenopause can technically happen at any age. Menopause is when a woman has gone a full year without having a period. Sometimes you might get really close, you may get 11 months, and then if you have one cycle, you start the clock over. So, menopause is where we have that really hard cutoff line. Perimenopause starts before then. So, I like to use different lab markers to help people gauge where they are in that journey because I've had plenty of women come to me saying, this has got to be perimenopause. I'm having brain fog. I'm having frequent urination. I'm having what feel like hot flashes. I'm not sleeping. My mood is shifting. And sometimes it's not perimenopause. Inflammation actually causes these exact same symptoms. So I like to use labs so that we know, is this truly perimenopause or not? An easy way to gauge that is doing an FSH. FSH and LH are our brain signals down to the ovaries. FSH and LH are going to increase because they're having to knock harder. Imagine they're trying to signal to the ovaries. They're knocking, they're saying, make progesterone, make estrogen, make testosterone, make all these things that you need to be making. And the ovaries are not responding. And so they're knocking harder and harder. So we can actually use the FSH, that's the one that's most commonly used, as a gauge of where we're at. When an FSH hits 25, we can say, even if you're still menstruating and you haven't gone that full year, you are for sure in that perimenopause, about to be menopause transition. When FSH goes above 10, we know that we are slowly starting down the journey toward perimenopause. So we can use that FSH as a gauge. And if it's under 10, chances are a woman is not in perimenopause, even if she's having the symptoms. So, what are the signs of perimenopause? Sleep issues is a huge one. Trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, maybe hot flashes at night, sometimes having to get up to urinate more often in the middle of the night, which makes it harder to fall back asleep. And then mind racing at night is all really common. Mood changes is another one. So, irritability. This is outside the scope of what's considered part of your personality. This would be you have a shorter fuse, you don't feel like yourself, you feel like you're more reactive. Things just really get under your skin more. That's how we define irritability. Depression, so any kind of low mood or mood swings, and increased anxiety is a really big one that pops up as well, or finding yourself worrying more or doing more kind of worst case scenarios in your head. Definitely the menstrual changes. So we start getting irregular or skipped periods. For most women, they get lighter. For some women, they get heavier before they get lighter. And then because ovulation starts to drop off, so we're not ovulating every cycle, then we're going to have cycles where we miss ovulation, which means that we're going to have more irregular and longer cycles, so more time in between periods. Eventually, ovulation just doesn't happen for all those 12 months out of the year. But up until then, it might be happening every other month or every 3 months until it hits that point. And perimenopause can go on for a very long time. So people can have irregular periods for potentially even up to 15 years before you might officially enter menopause, which is a really long time to just deal with symptoms. So we'll talk about how to actually deal with this. So, the hot flashes, those can happen at night or daytime. Vaginal dryness or discomfort, this might show up as pain during sex. Some women get other irritation signs in that vulvar vaginal area. Weight gain, so especially more around that midsection, can be really common. Trouble concentrating. This could look like even the classic trouble with focusing and memory problems might show up. It might be a little harder to find words, might be a little harder to remember where you parked your car, that kind of thing. But also, we can be looking at trouble with organizing things, even sometimes trouble at remembering memories, things like that. So we can sometimes have low libido as well. Really common to get joint and muscle aches. So you might just write this off as arthritis. And some women actually present with symptoms that are almost like fibromyalgia. So you're having the muscle tension and you're having the joint pain all at the same time, and you're tired. Perimenopause can lead to a lot of fatigue, and it can just be an all day, everyday kind of fatigue that really doesn't let up. It can be pretty intense for some people. We can have hair loss and we can have skin changes. We can have headaches that are worse because they're correlating with the changing hormones. We also, every once in a while, people have heart palpitations. This one isn't as common, but it definitely can happen. This would be where you feel like a flip flop or a fluttering in your heart, where you feel like your heart, you're just suddenly so much more aware of it than you otherwise would be because it's beating loudly or a little bit more differently in the way that it feels to you. So these are all possible signs of perimenopause. The tricky part is these are also signs of a lot of inflammatory conditions that are typically only diagnosed in the more naturopathic sphere. So one of these things that can actually mimic perimenopause is mold exposure. It can cause every single one of the things that I just listed. So it's really important to not assume that perimenopause is what you have and actually check. Use that FSH. Um, every once in a while, it's harder to grab an FSH accurately if you have any kind of outside hormones. So if you're on a birth control pill, if you have the IUD, as long as it's a hormonal IUD, this would not be the copper IUD, then every once in a while being on those exogenous or outside hormones actually lowers our FSH level. So without being on the hormones, you would have caught that FSH being at 25. But if you're on the hormones, maybe your FSH is a little lower than it otherwise would be. I still find that for most of the time, for most women, if you are truly in moderate perimenopause or later, you're still going to see a high FSH, even if you're taking exogenous hormones. Other shifts to think about here. So we have the direct effects of the lower hormones on our body. Our cortisol, so our adrenal glands sit right above our kidneys. They make our cortisol, which is our stress energy hormone. It becomes way more important. So before, our ovaries were making most of our hormones. Now we're relying on our adrenal glands to continue putting out some of our hormones. The adrenals are also now carrying the job of acting as our natural protective steroid in the body, not like the kind of steroid that you would take, where we think about that being detrimental to health over time. But this would be more of just a supportive role of keeping inflammation low and protecting different areas of our body, which we'll talk about in a second. So, cortisol and adrenals become more important. They take over as our ovaries slowly shut off. Cortisol is often demonized. Cortisol needs to be right middle of the road for it to have its nice anti inflammatory optimal effects on the body. Low cortisol is just as bad as high cortisol. So, this really needs to be balanced. And cortisol is not something that just stays a steady state throughout the day. It actually peaks within 30 minutes or so after we wake up and then steadily drops off throughout the day until it hits its low at night. So, our body can make melatonin, our sleep hormones. We can get good sleep. So, any kind of dysregulation in cortisol, which is going to be more likely if you are working really late, if you're answering emails or you're on screens before bed, if you're watching TV, if you're doing anything stimulating or watching any kind of horror murder shows right before bed, all that stuff is actually going to keep your cortisol from following that proper rhythm, not having a consistent sleep wake cycle, not getting light exposure in the morning. All those things can dysregulate our cortisol. Becomes more and more important to keep cortisol regulated the closer we get to perimenopause and menopause, because it's got to be strong and robust to take over and really sustain us. So that's a shift that happens. Another shift that happens is the drop in estrogen starts to lead to bone loss. This is not talked about. So, whenever we start to have this drop in estrogen that happens during peri and menopause, our bones actually start to turn over more. We lose some bone density. And because we're breaking down that bone, we're actually getting an increased heavy metal toxin load in the bloodstream. So our body is really smart and it knows that it doesn't want to expose our cells to heavy metals. And so it actually tucks away heavy metals into the bone when the exposure is more than what your body can eliminate with your regular liver and kidneys function of detox. So we actually are oftentimes seeing a liberation of heavy metals that are now freely roaming in the bloodstream, which is where when we have bone turnover, whatever is liberated enters the bloodstream. That can actually be responsible for some of the symptoms that are attributed to perimenopause and menopause. We see this especially with lead levels. If someone was exposed to more lead at a younger age, before lead would have been more banned and more regulated, this starts to show up as estrogen drops. So that can actually be tested for with labs as well. Quest now has a micronutrients heavy metal panel, and plenty of people's insurances cover Quest just fine. So that's one area to look at that. If you're worried about bone loss and you think that your bone is turning over quickly, if you've had any fractures, if you had any compression or stress fractures, any bone breaks at all, or if you've taken a lot of steroids in your lifetime, or if you have a family history of osteoporosis, I always recommend getting a DEXA scan. This is a scan that measures your bone density. It's not any harder than getting an x ray, and it really can help let us know what's going on with bones so we can be proactive. The sooner you act, the more likely you are to not have osteoporosis issues. One of the other shifts we see with perimenopause or menopause is we lose our insulation from inflammation. What I mean by that is that our sex hormones act as natural steroids, the good kind, and they help protect us from inflammation and keep our inflammation lower. So we lose that protection as our hormone levels drop. So that can show up with a lot of these inflammatory signs, and for some people, they could have already had pre existing inflammatory triggers that were causing brain fog, for example. And then once you lose your protection with the estrogen and the progesterone, once you lose those natural neuroprotective steroids, then the screen falls away, the mask falls away, and we're left with the inflammation that's underneath. So sometimes these, what are considered symptoms of perimenopause and menopause, are actually just signs of exposed inflammation that was hiding under the surface that you didn't know was there because you had this sex hormone shield or mask that was keeping these symptoms from being obvious. Another shift that happens is people can start having hives, skin rashes, more allergies, brain fog after eating, feeling more tired, all these histamine symptoms, intolerance to alcohol, maybe you feel flush after you get out of a hot shower. All of these high histamine symptoms can start to show up. This means that the histamine trigger was probably already there. And again, this was a masking situation. Progesterone was helping keep your histamine levels stabilized. Progesterone was helping keep your mast cells, your immune white blood cell warriors, from releasing histamine and a ton of similar mediators, a ton of other inflammatory chemicals really similar to histamine. It was keeping them from releasing that histamine. Now that you don't have the progesterone there stabilizing it, you might see an increase in the histamine and how it's affecting your body. We also, again, don't have that neuroprotective and overall body steroid protective effect that would be keeping inflammation low. So even if the histamine was being released, it could be hiding some of the effects of you feeling the histamine. So let's talk about what the solution is and what benefits we can get from balancing hormones. So everyone has their own personal ideas about what you want to do in terms of how you balance your hormones. We know that the Women's Health Initiative study, which was originally used to say that doing hormone replacement therapy was risky, it increased risk of cancer. We know that study was very flawed in its interpretation. That has been exposed, it's now been reinterpreted, and it's been shown to be risk neutral when it comes to cancer. and actually have a bunch of protective effects in the body. So, what are some of the benefits we get from our hormone levels? We get brain protection. We can actually, with labs, check our master precursor hormone levels that are our most potent brain neurosteroids. We can actually measure those ones with labs. And if hormones start to drop, we can actually supplement those. So if someone doesn't want to do a full hormone replacement therapy, we can just give the precursors as supplements in a safe way according to labs and let the body do with that what it will to keep inflammation down and get some of the benefits that we get from hormones. We also get heart protection from our hormones. Hormones can help keep our cholesterol lower, and sex hormones can even help keep blood pressure stabilized. Sex hormones help us get good sleep, which is really important for restoration of our cells and for our overall health. Hormones also help us feel grounded and calm. Progesterone, in particular, if we're low in progesterone, we might have this constant, uneasy, ungrounded feeling. When you get enough progesterone, you often feel very grounded, peaceful. You feel like you're your best self. You're able to navigate the world, usually in the way that most people want to be navigating. Hormones can also help us stay motivated. They can increase our motivation so that you actually have the energy to, for example, meal prep. And hormones can also help us have more energy so we can have the energy to do something like exercise. So there are a lot of benefits to hormones. These aren't even all of them, but it can really help to have balanced hormones. So, what is the solution to balancing hormones? So, there is that option of going with the master precursor hormones, pregnenolone and DHEA sulfate, and helping supplement those in a way that will trickle downstream without needing to directly take hormones. Anytime that there is a big family risk of cancer or a previous history of cancer, a lot of these are going to be off the table, and we're going to want to do more local topical support or other avenues instead. If there's not a big cancer risk, then hormone replacement therapy, taking therapeutic levels of progesterone, estrogen, and sometimes testosterone can be really helpful. Unfortunately, a lot of people who are prescribing this are just using regular lab reference ranges for what's considered normal, or they're not prescribing it because they're telling women that's a normal menopause range. So it's often helpful to find a more functional or naturopathic hormone prescriber, someone who knows what the optimal ranges are and is more up on that hormone research. A lot of gynecologists who are doing hormone prescribing are operating off of more antiquated conventional models, which don't often, in my opinion, yield the highest benefits for people. Another option would be to do a more supplement approach. There are supplement options where natural plant steroids have been converted into progesterone and different types of estrogen. There's supplement forms of the DHEA and the pregnenolone, which are the master mother of the other hormones. So we can actually use supplement forms to increase progesterone and estrogen in people who are not wanting to do the official bioidentical hormone replacement. Bioidentical hormone replacement is bioidentical. It looks exactly like the hormone to your body. So I'm not a big fan of the current trend, which is you start to have perimenopause symptoms, you go to your gynecologist, they don't even check your labs, and maybe they do, and they offer you birth control. Birth control is partially sitting on your receptors. It's not fully plugging in. It does not have the benefits of bioidentical real hormones in the body. So, for example, if you're taking birth control, that is a fake estrogen and that is a fake progesterone. They're not the real thing. Progestin is not progesterone. So, they are, let's say, your receptor for estrogen is a round shaped whole receptor. Say that this is a square and it's going to just barely fit inside the circle, but it's not a full fit. And that's how it works as birth control, is because it's enough to signal your body to think that it's there and shut down the processes downstream, but it's not enough to actually have the real effects. And so your body doesn't end up going through an actual fertile cycle because you're not getting the effects of real hormones. So that's why it's birth control, is because they're fake hormones. They're only half registering. So we're not getting there. You don't get the same benefits from that as you would from actually taking bioidentical hormone replacement. And a lot of times being on birth control can increase things like migraines and other kind of hormone fluctuation symptoms in women because you're just getting really high levels of this fake estrogen often. And you're not getting any real progesterone. So your own real progesterone has tanked. You don't have that real progesterone to balance out the way that you maybe would have if you took birth control in your 20s. So people are going to feel a lot worse usually on birth control when you're more in your 40s and beyond. And sometimes birth control works great for people. Sometimes that is a great option. And I'm always a fan just to be extra cautious of getting your clotting factors. So how fast your body is clotting and breaking down clots. Just check and make sure that you don't have any risk factors for that before you get on birth control. You'd be surprised how many people have positive D dimers or other clotting factors coming back, and they're just not being checked. They're not being screened before they're put on birth control, which has a much higher potential clotting risk. So, if one note on this before we move on from that is just because you're not having regular cycles doesn't mean that you are free of the risk of pregnancy. So, some people do opt for doing birth control, even knowing it's not going to have the best effect, just because they want that pregnancy protection. And you can still try to use FSH as a lab marker while taking birth control. Otherwise, the surefire option would be you get off the birth control, you wait just a couple months, and then you check the FSH. And then you would know for sure. But plenty of people wouldn't want to get off of it just to test. So a lot of times we just test it while still on it. So we talked about the benefits of hormones. There's so many different thoughts and different perspectives, different camps of where people stand on the issue of hormones and perimenopause. Is it a natural process in the body? Yes. Do we have a higher toxin load and more inflammation, less nutrients, and less balanced cortisol to carry us through? Also, yes. Are we living longer than we used to? Yes. So my opinion is there is no need to suffer unnecessarily, especially if it's something that's not increasing harm and it's not causing any negative effects in the body. So, whenever I have conversations with people, it's obviously a very case by case. This isn't the best approach for everyone, but I would say the majority of women doing some kind of hormone replacement therapy, even if we just do a supplement version, often ends up to be really beneficial because then we can get the benefit with that kind of anti inflammatory effect. We get the brain health and the brain fog benefits where we get that mental clarity, better focus, more motivation. We get the benefits to sleep, which is so great to overall health. And overall, people just feel better. So you can actually make more health changes in other areas of your life. Eat that more nutritious food or try to move your body a little bit more every day. So it's definitely an individual conversation, but this is something that is an overlooked area for most people. Most people who are having these symptoms are either just being told, yep, it's perimenopause, here's a birth control pill or an IUD, or they're being told perimenopause is just natural and there's nothing you need to do about this. So, number one, make sure that it is truly perimenopause. Number two, rule out the other things that could still be mimicking this. You can have two or three things going on that are all causing similar symptoms. So, if you are having some kind of potential inflammation trigger, you can be having perimenopause at the same time and you'd be having double the intensity of your symptoms and it'd be coming from both things at once. So, make sure that you're really looking at your actual root causes so you're not missing anything. And if you're having any signs of increased histamine, so if you're having the alcohol intolerance, the skin rashes, the brain fog after eating or fatigue after eating, feeling flushed, having overall more achy joints, that kind of thing, don't dismiss that because just because progesterone helps stabilize histamine, it still means your immune system is reacting to something. And we know that the longer inflammation goes on or the longer we live with high histamine levels, the more likely we are to have issues down the road from the negative effects of the inflammation. So, getting on top of these things soon is really helpful. I'm always a fan of prevention if we can be preventing things. So, I hope this was helpful. I specifically help people with chronic inflammation and balancing hormones. Balancing hormones is never not a part of the picture. So, if you're working with someone and you're trying to do a root cause holistic approach and they're not considering your hormones, you are missing a big piece of your picture. So, make sure you're considering your hormones. Make sure you're getting the lab work that could help clear up your picture. Make sure you're working with someone who's actually going to consider what all is going on behind the scenes with your hormones and not just give you a birth control pill, unless that's what you want, of course. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you all next time. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Surviving to Thriving podcast. I hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to support your journey towards better health and happiness. Remember, each health journey is unique. This podcast is not medical advice, and it's essential to consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes. If you'd like to schedule a complimentary consultation with me, I would love to talk with you. Please go to drrachelyager.com/schedule.